Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Best Ideas Happen on the Loo or Tell It Day podcast series powered by Loowatt. We're here today to celebrate the people and the ideas transforming sanitation, social impact, and innovation all across the world. I'm Shaval, your host, and today I'm very thrilled to be joined by Alvin. I'm going to hand over the ball straight to you, Alvin. You can introduce yourself, who you are, what you do, and welcome to the podcast.
Yes, thank you so much. It's an honor to be here. My name is Alvin Anderson, and I'm born and raised in South Africa, Durban specifically, 32 years of age, and a father of three very beautiful boys. And at the moment, I work as an executive director for a local nonprofit organization called Kaloola. And part of what we do is that we are trying to provide a sanitation service to informal settlement communities that do not have access to sanitation, and in the form of a pedestal together with an outside structure. And residents are currently paying 350 Rand a month for that, together with the weekly services. And everything is run on a digital platform where we're able to track how many toilets we have to date, which is about 200. How many weekly services we do to make sure that we are providing a level of quality of service for our customers. So that is crucial. Quality experience, that is something that we are striving to achieve. And we're hoping that we can also expand the business model that we are currently running in Durban to other parts of South Africa. So that's basically what we do in a nutshell.
Thank you so much. This was a great brief introduction for all of you who don't know, haven't heard of Kaloola yet. We're going to dive in later more and talk more about the nitty-gritty parts of sanitation. And before we do, I wanted to do some fun questions, just some rapid fire to warm up the conversation a little bit. I would like to know, Alvin, are you a coffee or a tea person?
Coffee.
Ooh, same, more or less sometimes. Sometimes. And morning person or night owl?
Morning person.
Okay, agreed. And what is your favorite place where you've had an aha moment?
Like in the world?
Yeah, anywhere. Just anywhere.
I have to say Barcelona in Spain.
Oh, that's awesome.
That was my aha moment, yeah.
And if toilets could talk, what would yours say?
Why didn't you use me enough?
Interesting. And one last question. What is your favorite podcast if you listen to podcasts at the moment?
Very good point. I think my favorite podcast at the moment is actually specifically two. One is Diary of a CEO. I really enjoy those. And then the other one would be, there's a local podcaster called SMWX, which is Sizwe Mbofu. He's more on the political side, landscape, and talks about South African politics and how it's being shaped since, historic times of apartheid, and how we are struggling at the moment to grapple with some of the nuances within South Africa.
That's really interesting. I will have to listen to that. I need to write that down myself. And then thirdly, of course, Loowatt's podcast. Thank you so much. And I would like to continue with, to dive straight into sanitation. And I would love to know your story a little bit more. What first brought you into the world of sanitation?
Very, very good question. So my journey in sanitation started in 2018. I had the opportunity to, through a nonprofit organization that I was working for, where they were sending volunteers to what they would call South-North volunteers. So it's basically volunteers from the Southern Hemisphere or developing countries, as one would put it, to go to developed countries. And I had the opportunity to go to Germany. And I spent a year in a city called Bremen, where I lived and worked there. And then I was introduced to a company called Border, which stands for Bremen Overseas Research Development Association. And they are basically an entity that's been around for 45 years. And they do sustainable sanitation solutions. So they work with local municipalities, government, private sector to be able to take a different approach when it comes to sanitation, which is if you're not connected to a conventional sewer, what are your on-site options from a decentralized perspective? So I really fell in love with that idea, and I thought this is something that South Africa desperately needs. And when we were talking about it, only to find out that they have a South African office at the time. And then since then I have become from volunteership to then working for Border within South Africa as an administrator, and then worked my way up from there to becoming the finance manager, then the regional finance manager, which is because we are active in 25 countries. So we also have a country offices within the Africa region, which is Zambia, Tanzania, Mali, and etc. So I was then managing all that finance and administrative aspect around that within the Africa region. And then eventually I would go on to become the country director for Border South Africa. And yeah, and ever since then, I've always been interested in trying to look at different solutions. And then that's how I ended up joining Kaloola as the executive director.
This is really amazing because it's very close to my heart. Because fun fact, I'm from Germany, and so I live in Germany. Yes, I've been to Bremen many years ago. But when I first came across Borda, I didn't realize like, wow, this is actually from Germany, but it's
Yeah.
worldwide. It's so globally connected, which is amazing, and it's great to see your perspective because you have been here. You've been in many different countries and you worked on different organizations. So you bring all these perspectives with you. So it's so super interesting to hear about it. And if you reflect back on it, can you maybe describe a moment where you realized where this is what I want to do?
Very good point. I think, sometimes, if I look back now, hindsight is always a beautiful thing. But I think, the moment that changed the spectrum for me was realizing that, when I saw the numbers of how many people didn't have access to safe sanitation, it was scary, and I think I was not really, it was not a sector that I had come into contact with. I knew that, we have water issues as a country, but I was not really exposed to the magnitude of the problem when it came to sanitation. And I think for me, that still to this day still drives me because I know that we are helping people, but it's not as at a rapid rate as in terms of accessibility, because there's still so many people that still don't have access. So, we have to work even smarter and harder now to actually try our best with the rapid urbanization and population sizes that are growing. I feel like we're not keeping up with that demand. So I think that was my moment, and still is my moment today, that we are trying to solve a challenge that is ever changing, and is ever growing.
Yeah, I think we're talking about 3.5 billion people that lack access to safely managed sanitation and water in general. And I think what's really amazing and beautiful about this sector is everyone who works in this sector shares the same mission to fight those issues, and especially more in informal settlements, and to really be there for the people and work for them and with them. How has it changed since you first started? Have you seen a lot of progress?
Yeah, I think you are right. I think when I joined the sector, the number was sitting at 4.2 billion, um, which is quite interesting. So there has been that little bit of a shift, even though it's been making a small inroads. But it has changed. I think, there's definitely much more impetus now on people wanting to try alternative sanitation, whereas people were like, no, they still heavily believe in central works, non-sewage sanitation won't work. The idea as well of residents in informal settlements willing to pay for a sanitation service, even though the municipality provides a free basic service. Because within the South African context, within our constitution, it's enshrined that the government has to provide a basic free service, which is great. But also, there's not many options often for informal settlement communities. So even in even affluent communities, sometimes the ownership is not on them. It's always central treatment works, which is, I'm not saying that they're bad. I'm just saying that they have their role to play. And unfortunately, not everyone can have that standard. So we need to understand that we need to look at alternatives around that, water saving, reuse, circular economy, instead of going from, your linear, which is capture and dispose of, where we talk about reusing some of those nutrients to put it back into a system. So I think that's so important. So I've definitely seen there has been that paradigm shift where people are willing to pay for a sanitation service that they want to be in control of. That's the one. And then I think the two is that there's definitely more conversations around reuse, because we are a water stress country, or also looking at systems like what Kaloola is offering right now as a waterless. How do we get that implemented? So I think that's also so important.
How do you perceive the toilets or the sanitation that is currently offered? Because I believe most of them are chemical toilets, correct?
Yeah, I think
What's
that
your point on that?
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on its head, Savelle. I think one of the challenges there is that with chemical toilets, it's not the difference between what we are offering versus a chemical toilet, as an example. So often chemical toilets, it's a private company that is basically has a contract with the government, and then they have to provide these toilets, these chemical toilets within informal settlements within informal settlements, but it's not a one customer, one toilet kind of vibe. It
Mm-hmm.
is normally placed on the periphery of an informal settlement, and most of the time, community members have to sometimes walk quite large distances to be able to access them. And even then, when they do have access to them, sometimes they're in an undignified state or manner because they require regular emptying. And because there's so many people that are reliant on the service, it then creates, a massive challenge when it comes to that in terms of accessibility. So what Kaloola is offering is we have the direct line with the customer where the toilet is directly outside their premises. And then they get to dictate how clean that toilet needs to be, how they would like to use it, who's going to be using it. So all of those things, the choice that not everyone has that ability. And I think that's one of the landscapes I think that we are trying to say is that we're not trying to say don't use chemical toilets. I think they do have their place within the community, but we also need to give options for community members that can afford it and are willing to say that this is what I want. This is the quality of service that I would like to have. And I think that's important.
100% agree with you. And how or where also do you stay updated on all these industry shifts or sector shifts? Because from what I know, progress can be rather slow at times. How do you stay in touch with all the news, the innovations?
Very good point. I mean, yesterday I was at they launched a sanitation technology forum yesterday as just one example where they're looking at trying to have our voices within the sanitation sector carried because the knife has been very slow. It's the slow turning knife. Everyone, if one would use that comparative or figurative way to compare how the sanitation sector works in South Africa. So I think it's important to understand that, it's going to take some time and our voices need to get louder. And the only ways that we can do that is if we have our CSIP sanitation dialogue event that's coming up next month. We have the Water Institute of Southern Africa, which we are a membership of as Kaloola as an entity. And those are the things that we try to keep up to date with because they are regular regulations in terms of the Water Services Act. We also get updates on what is the number within South Africa in terms of access to sanitation as well as access to water. So these are some of the platforms we use to be able to get up to date with what's happening and current events, not just on a South African perspective, but also on the continent as well, because there's also other things that we look at. I'm not sure if you guys are familiar with the Fecal Sludge Management Alliance that recently closed their doors as an example. That was also a key hub for us. The other institutes as well as the International Water Association. They're having a non-sewage sanitation conference next year. They had one 2 years ago here in South Africa, the first one actually. So we're hoping to be part of these conversations to be able to say, look, this is the work that we do. This is what we are trying to do. This is what we're trying to achieve, not just as a business, but also as a country, as a continent, because we think we can make a difference in the lives of people.
Absolutely. And you do every single day. And I believe like these stories, all that knowledge has to be spread out into the world more. Because oftentimes when you work in a niche sector, everyone within the sector is aware of the issue, but what about the rest of the world, right? And we need to tell more of those stories. And I always like to, educate people that are not even working in this sector on these topics. And this is why we're here today as well. What would you say is a misconception about toilets or sanitation that you wish more people would understand?
I think it's the yuck factor for me. And that's the biggest thing for me, which is very important. And so I used an example of when I come home, the first thing my son asks me, he's 7 years old, and he says like, "Oh, Dad, were you talking about poop and toilets today?" And I always say, "Yes, and that's my job." And I think for us that we've normalized the idea of talking about poop and toilets over the dinner table, and I think it's important because what we do is part of everyday life. It's very important, and we need to also understand that what we are doing when we are in the sector is that there's lots of value because whatever we eat provides energy. It's a source of life for our bodies. So whatever we give off is also a source of life. It's rich in nutrients. It's rich in soil fertilizer, composting. There's so many. It can even be used to produce food. We speak of that, circular economy, rich fertilizer. There's lots of studies being done. What you would, as an example, and if you use potable water to grow plants versus treated effluent, as an example, or using compost from organic compost from what we do in the toilet, which is rich. And there's studies that show that the yield and the quality of yield of that product is much more better in its raw form. Obviously, it must be done in a safe way. I must call that to heat. It must be done in a safe way. But I'm just saying that there's enough studies showing the benefits of that. And I think we need to start normalizing that. I think we've become so westernized and think that everything that we do is bad around the toilet and sanitation specifically. But we need to understand that it's a resource. COVID-19 showed us that, we could actually do a surveillance around which are the hotspots in terms of where COVID had broken out, just using wastewater treatment and using the toilet. The toilet has, rich information that we can use to be able to solve some of our challenges. So those are just some of the examples. And I think we just need to normalize it and get this yuck factor out of our mindset and have a paradigm shift.
Absolutely, because it touches on so much more than just health and environment, and even like the yuck, how you call it, it has some data in it as well, like could be used for health data purposes. And I think you said it so well. How does your work also connect to gender and social equity?
A lot, because, I just use as a typical example, you can tell even to this day that a lot of the infrastructure around sanitation is still male driven. And what do I mean by that? We are fortunate enough that we made some changes to our home where my wife was like, can we please have a wash basin within the toilet? Because that will be helpful for her, especially when she's on her menstrual cycle. So that's so important at the access aspect. And you can tell that if there's a female who's responsible for some of the design flaws that you see within a structure of how a toilet needs to look like, it will solve a lot of the challenges. And that's one. And then two is that the other thing is, women are the ones that suffer the most when there's bad sanitation. It's a fact, within schools, within absenteeism rate, and the ones that even today are marginalized. And if we ever want to get that back on within equality, we have to be able to provide an environment that's conducive for them to be able to excel, and I think that's so important. So what we are trying to do is trying to balance that equation. And I think it starts with sanitation. If you have proper, adequate sanitation for those that are marginalized, specifically women, people with disabilities, the elderly, I think then it will alleviate some of the challenges that we experience in terms of inequality within societies, within communities.
Absolutely, because we always like to highlight how sanitation touches all of our UN SDGs. It's all interconnected, like even for work. You mentioned women who work, especially if there's no access to clean sanitation or even a safe sanitation. I mean, you see those stories every single day. What maybe you can tell which story or a life has stuck with you the most?
I think that one of the things that has stuck with me from the team, specifically within Kaloola, was where a lot of there was a customer, an elderly customer, as an example, who has to make a choice between, as an example, they got to her informal home and they found that, she didn't even have a bed, and yet she was paying for this toilet. And she basically said, to one of our colleagues, was like, for her, that's the choice. It's either invest in a bed or a toilet. And for her, she would rather invest in a toilet because she doesn't have an option. At that time in her home, she was using bricks and had made some sort of something to be able to sleep on. But with the toilet, there is no option, and that's the parallel. So, that story stuck with me and stuck with me till to this day. It's something that's scary, that there's people that have to choose between having to sleep on a bed and having to pay for a toilet. And that tells you that there's a lot wrong with that situation, because I don't think people should be placed in those kind of corners and settings. I think everyone should have access to a toilet and everyone should have an access to a bed, because those are equally important. So, those are just some of the stories. And then, there's many other stories that I've been encountered. But yeah, that's the one that still sticks with me today.
Wow, it's really dire and sad to see, because as you said, this shouldn't be a choice. It should be a human right. to have that access and the safety and the stability that comes with it. How would you say has your perspective changed on dignity and humanity through your work?
I think in terms of change, I've always been, I've been very fortunate because I've always worked in the nonprofit sector. My career span
Mhm.
within the sector has been 15 years within the nonprofit sector specifically. And I mentioned I started in sanitation in 2018. But I think, what has really been encouraging for me is to be able to see the change that we are trying and the impact that we are having. But at the same time, is the realization that the journey is still long and that it's a long,
Mhm.
daunting path. It's the slow turning knife. So I think my perspective has changed in that sense that we still need to do more and we can do more when resources are provided. I think it's knowing how to balance that because sometimes you can take your problems with you at home and be like,
Mhm.
just feel completely overwhelmed by everything. But I think it's important to have that balance, understand that you are making a difference. And it's okay sometimes to pat yourself in the back to say, you are making a difference. It's just going to take a little
Mhm.
longer. You can't solve everything at one go. And yeah, that's been something that I've constantly taken with me is to try and be positive, even in a circumstances where things are dire.
Would you say this is what keeps you hopeful when things feel or when change feels very slow?
Yeah. And I think, to be very
Mm.
honest with you, I'm a very optimistic person anyway, in
Mhm.
general. So be bubbly, smiley, hopeful. So I think, that has helped. So I think I am optimistic about what's to come in the sector. The thing that worries me a little bit, that keeps me up at night, is that knowing that
Mhm.
if somebody had to ask me, what did you do with your time within the sanitation sector? Would it have made a difference? Would it have had, some sort of impact? And I'm always constantly thinking about that because of the fact that there's a lot that needs to be done. And I'm hoping that we can continuously, year on year, make a difference.
And I'm certain, I mean, you are and you will. And even having these thoughts only shows how much you care and how much the people who work in this sector care. Because otherwise, A, you wouldn't work in sanitation, but then also you wouldn't think about all these stories every single day. I mean, you see those people face to face on site, and it's like right there in front of you. And as you said, I think there's a balance that comes with it. It is a sad situation, but there's still things happening. If you could have a magic wand, how would you imagine the sector in, let's say, 20 years from now?
Yeah, I think if I had a magic wand, very good point. I think I would. I think the first thing that I would do is that it's being able to make sure that everyone has access to safely managed sanitation. I think that's the key. That's the goal. That's the gold standard in inverted commas, and that also that we can all work harmoniously and understand that there's not one best solution. There's no silver bullet. There's no silver lining. There's not a one size fits all. It's that we can coexist within this environment. And when I say coexist, I mean you can have a non-sewer sanitation solution, you can have central works, you can have various options, but
Mhm.
what is best suited for that environment is best suited for that
Mhm.
environment. It's to coexist within this ecosystem of sanitation. I think that's what I would do with my magic wand. And yeah, and also that everyone is optimistic and is encouraging each other because, like I said, the road is daunting and challenging.
I love this vision. I'm absolutely, absolutely there with you. And you briefly mentioned financial resources as well. If you could share like a message with the leaders, maybe even people who are in charge of these decisions, what would you tell them?
Very good point. I think the mind might be twofold. I think the first thing is to listen. I think it's important to just
Mhm.
listen and understand. I think that's, those are the first things, you know, that's always something I've been able to carry with me, running it, being
Mhm.
a part of a team. One thing that's a crucial part or component of running a team is listening and understanding.
Mhm.
And once you listen and you understand, then the job at hand becomes a lot more easier. But then further to that is to take action. I think one of the biggest challenges that we face as a country in South Africa is that people listen, they understand, but then there's no action. There's often it lays somewhere in a corner and it's, somebody else's problem. So it's about also being able to say, let's take action. Let's take accountability. Let's make a difference. Let's use the little resources I have and pool those to be able to make a difference. Because what we are
Mhm.
seeing sometimes is that people are so overwhelmed by the problem and the listening and all of these things, but they don't take any initiative. Those
Mhm.
problems lay where they are. I think we live in a world where we are resourceful. There's lots that we can do. Yesterday in the sanitation forum, I made the story of an example of how our first office was formed, where, there was no such thing as EFTs. There was no such thing as, 45 years ago, there was no such thing as,
Mhm.
being able to pick up a phone someone on the other side of the world to be able to communicate with them. Today, we have social media, we have WhatsApps, we have
Mhm.
podcasts, we have all of that. We live in a world that information is constantly flowing. But the question is, what are we doing with that information? Are we using that to take action? And that's the next step that we need to take. And I'm hoping when people listen to this, they understand that there's lots that we can do because the resources are there, but it's how we are using them, how we are managing them to make a difference. And that is critical. So it's listen, understand, and take action.
Oh, this is the perfect connection to my last question. If you could share one message with the rest of the world that are not touched by these issues, that are maybe not even aware of that these things are happening, what is one thing that everybody should understand about toilets?
Yeah, I think the message would be, we're not going to give up. We're just not going to give up. We're going to keep going until somebody listens and understands and takes action. Because like I said, I have a mission, I have a vision, I know what is required to get there. I'm not saying that I have all the answers. I'm constantly learning
Mhm.
from other people. I don't have all the answers to some of the challenges we're experiencing, but we do have one solution in the many challenges that we experience, but we can use that as leverage to be able to make a difference. So I think it's important to reach out, to please reach out if there's something that you want to know more about. My door is always open, and I mean that literally. So yeah, it's just to reach out and know that we're going to keep trying until the wheels fall off. We're going to keep riding this wave.
This is amazing because something that connects everybody is we will always need the toilet. Like no matter who you are, where you live, we're always going to need the toilet. And it's always going to be an issue for us, especially if we look at the future and our resources. So thank you so much, Alvin, for sharing your insights, your humor, and your passion really to work in this sector. This was a delightful conversation. I learned, as always, so much. And to everybody listening, I hope this gave you some inspiration, and thank you for tuning in our podcast series to celebrate World Toilet Day 2025. We'll see you in next episodes. Keep listening, and also remember, toilet jokes are appropriate. Thank you, everybody.